Hi, good morning, colleagues. Let me just unshare that. We just want to quickly check your video and audio. Tato, Sma, and Zandile. I can see you, Zandile. Just unmute to check on your audio, your microphone.
Are you able to hear me, Asha?
Perfectly. It sounds slightly echoish, but I guess the closer you are to the microphone, the better.
Sure.
I mean, if you do have earphones and the little microphone built in, that might help, but otherwise you're fine. Tata, you fine?
Morning.
Sma, I can see both of you. Yes, great. And I heard Tato. Sma, can I hear you? You muted. Hi. Are you speaking through the microphone that's on your yeah, it sounds slightly broken there. Just try again. Sma? Yeah, your audio, I'm not sure if it's my side. Hold on. Zandile, can you hear Sma?
I can't also hear Smart.
Yeah, Sma,
sorry, I'm struggling to hear Smart as well.
Okay, Sma, if you could just check if your audio is okay there on your side, and if it's coming through your earpiece and microphone, or it's coming through the built-in microphone on the laptop. I'll play the background video and song again until say about 29 minutes past or so, and then we can check again if you need to. This is just a quick announcement for the attendees already registered. Raise hands are not functional in this environment with a large number of participants, so please just lower your hands. If you've got any questions or comments to make, use the chat box and type it there. So not Stephen Lefekane, please just lower your hand and type in the chat box. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Sma, I can hear your microphone. Are you testing?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me clearly now?
That is perfect. Thank you very much. I think your audio is the best amongst all of us. Thank you. Okay, so I'll restart the video again. We'll probably start in a minute or two. Thanks.
That's fine. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on ergonomics and COVID-19, where we will be looking at lessons learned from an ergonomics perspective of work and basically just what work has entailed during a pandemic. My name is Zandile Hoyi. I am the principal medical scientist at the ergonomics unit of the NIOH. We thank you so much for your time and for availing yourselves for this engagement, and we hope that it will be a fruitful one and we'll all take home some lessons learned during this period of time. I would like to also extend a warm welcome to our panelists who will be providing us with an in-depth perspective into this discipline of ergonomics, touching on various themes within the field of work, and also looking at it during COVID-19 era. I will now hand over to my colleague Ashraf to take us through the proceedings of the morning. Enjoy.
Thank you very much for that welcome. And as you've heard my colleague, I need to thank her for quite a lot of legwork and background in ensuring that this particular webinar could materialize today, and that you will, as the attendees of today's session, be benefiting from that. Just a very quick announcement before we move on. We have had more than 1,500 people registering for today's session. However, our Zoom license can have a maximum of 1,000 attendees who have logged in. And once we reach the 1,000, then unfortunately people can't log in anymore. And I'm going to post in the chat box for you the link, and people could perhaps Google it as well, the NIH's YouTube channel. And this webinar will also be streamed live on the YouTube channel. Unfortunately, the YouTube channel, we don't monitor questions and so on. There is a little bit of a disadvantage there, but if we reach the 1,000 attendees, please recommend your colleagues to use the YouTube link in order to follow the webinar there. We are moving towards 800 already. Okay, so yes, welcome. And I think that slide is perfect. I'm just really going to then share that one. which essentially is the program for today. So our topic for today, I think it's our 96th webinar since March 2020. That's our 96th COVID-19 webinar in the series. And this particular webinar is dealing with the topic ergonomics and COVID-19. What are the lessons learned? And as you've heard from Zandile, we will be reflecting with the three speakers, including herself, on exactly how we've experienced this unexpected SARS-CoV-2 virus popping around, spreading across the globe, and affecting us not just in South Africa, but in our workplaces. So from an occupational health and safety point of view, we have our ergonomists, if I've got that correctly pronounced, ready to share the information, knowledge, and presentation slides with you today. And just a quick announcement around admin, and this is for Mokhadi, Zanele, Mosiwalo, and Elise. The raised hand function is not available in a Zoom webinar of this nature with such a large number of people. Unfortunately, we cannot open the microphones for everybody to speak with such large numbers. We therefore encourage you strongly, when you have questions for the presenters, please type your questions in the Q&A box. That's the double bubble, speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. And it's got a Q&A below the double bubble. That's where you type questions only. So to Joanna, Jean, Rowan, and Pia, who said good morning there in the Q&A box, wrong box. It's the chat box, which is for your general comments, general questions around administration, etc., and so on. Specific questions to our presenters and the content of their presentations, please use the Q&A box. It facilitates us to keep a proper record of the questions there and the answers that will be typed there for you, as well as if there are any live answers to that. Towards the end, we will reflect on the questions that have been answered already there, etc. And we'll be asking our presenters to reflect on the key questions, the key observations they've made of the questions in the Q&A box, and generally speaking, just additional comments they want to make before we close. So without further ado, there you have the program on the screen. Our first topic is teleworking, and interesting concept, working from home, etc. There's been many concepts and terms used to describe the new way of working that has emerged during COVID-19, and for some of us might continue, for others we may have returned back to the office or the workspace or the production floor. And that is Ms. Tatu Malisa. She is the ergonomics consultant and that a CPE in training at Kajima. And then secondly, we have the topic that follows on working conditions before and during COVID-19. And Mrs. Sma Ngamu Tukulula, apologies, my tongues are all twisted this morning, the MD and certified ergonomics professional at Smart Ergonomics. And then our third speaker, who you've already met on cognitive aspects of working during COVID-19, is by Ms. Zandile Hoi. She's the principal medical scientist and ergonomics unit, occupational medicine section here at the NIH. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Tatu just to prepare to share her slides. And while she's doing that, I'm going to just quickly share with you a quick bio slide of the colleague. If I can just quickly get my things sorted, one moment. I think, yes, there we go. So I'm just going to get the right slide. There you are. And then to share that particular screen as part of introducing. Could I just ask you for a moment, to just give me a second to share my screen? Apologies. If you can just unshare your screen. Thanks. Apologies for that. I've been giving you double messages there. So, and if I can just get to behind all of my, there we go. So I hope that is now the big one. And if I could pause that for you, there we go. So by way of introduction, and I'm not sure if you're seeing my screen or I'm sure you're seeing the right screen, apologies. Any guess? Let me just finish this. So Mr. Malesa is an ergonomics consultant at Gima Holdings, a certified professional ergonomist in training with the Ergonomics Society of South Africa. She holds a Master's of Science degree in Human Kinetics and Ergonomics from Rhodes University. Tatu works work centers around conducting a variety of ergonomics risk assessments in different working industries such as mining and railway. She's passionate about ergonomics on a wider spectrum with the aim of helping companies introduce ergonomics programs, thus making workplaces safer and productive. She hopes to see more ergonomics opportunities being created in the country for upcoming ergonomists. And with that, welcome, Tatu. I'm going to unshare that. Welcome to this particular webinar, and thank you for putting in all the time, effort, and energy to prepare and to be with us here on this webinar. You can share your slide now, Tatu, and you'll see that there's a significant interest in this particular topic today. We've had over 1,500 people registering for the session, and we have reached almost 920 people that's logged in. As soon as we've reached the 1,000 logins, we can't unfortunately accommodate more people. The Zoom license only allows a maximum of 1,000. I'm about to post the link for the YouTube channel where you can watch this live. And with that, please type your questions for Tatu in the question and answer box, and only general comments in the chat box. I'm going to hand over to you immediately. Please proceed. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashrafa and Zandile. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the platform for me to present at this webinar. So I'll just get kick-started with my presentation. The focus of my presentation will be on teleworking in the context of COVID-19 pandemic and ergonomics, as well as the lessons learned. Teleworking is also referred to remote working or working from home. And basically, it's work done in any other spaces besides the corporate offices. Teleworking is actually not a new thing. There's extensive research that shows that teleworking has been done or has been practiced in some organizations in developed countries as well as developing countries. So the concept of teleworking originated or goes as far back as the 1970s, originating from the United States with the aim to reduce energy consumptions. So with the graph in front of me, the graph illustrates teleworking before COVID-19 in Canada. So we can see that before COVID-19, 12% of the working population in Canada were already practicing teleworking or working from home before the COVID-19 pandemic. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we can see that there has been an increase in teleworking in Canada. So it shows that many organizations, as a way to try to measure the coronavirus and to restrict people from going to the offices, many employees were required to work from home. Also, it is evident that following the pandemic, there has been an increase in both teleworking from a developed country perspective and a developing country perspective. So for example, we can see that before the COVID-19 pandemic, 44% of the employees in Malaysia were also working from home. However, in South Africa, it's a different context. You know, we see that only 1.4% of the working population in South Africa were working from home before COVID. So this means that the whole concept of teleworking was relatively new to some of us in South Africa. You know, it was exciting, but also there was a whole level of uncertainty as to how do we go about working from home, because this is a relatively new concept. So following the pandemic, as many employees are required to work from home, we see how employees try to adapt to different working environments in their own homes. So we see how some employees are working from their lounges, how some employees are working from their kitchen spaces, you know, how some employees are working from their couches. You know, I'm sure many of us attending this webinar this morning are guilty of, you know, just working in bed or working on the couch. And we see that with having to work from home, employees are also trying to juggle between working from home and also juggling your personal life. And this whole concept of trying to juggle your your work and also juggle your personal life can be explained by the spillover theory, which is defined as the conditions under which the spillover between the work microsystem and the family microsystem is positive or negative. That means participation in one domain may affect participation in another domain. And we get to see how everything is just merged into one space. Work is merged into your personal space. Everything is just being in one space. And as a result, people are trying to find a balance between work and life. So with the whole concept of ergonomics, we can now see that there is little research that focuses on the concept of teleworking in relation to ergonomics. And even when some of the employees are reflecting on their home workspaces, we get to see how people are saying, oh, but my back is sore from sitting on the couch, or my chair is not comfortable, or I'm having neck tension or shoulder tension. And all of that, they don't know how to define it as what can it be. And the whole umbrella to all those things that they are mentioning can be defined as ergonomics. And the international ergonomics is defined as the scientific discipline that is concerned with the understanding of the interaction among humans and other elements of the system. So basically, ergonomics try to match the human with other elements of the system. But with the increase in teleworking, we get to see that there is a mismatch between ergonomics and other elements of the system. And as a result, we need to now start looking into how can we optimize ergonomic conditions in home offices? How can we try to control ergonomic hazards in our home offices? So with teleworking, we can see that employees are basically exposed to a variety of occupational ergonomic injuries. And these injuries come from the characteristics of the telework workstation. For example, the workstation exposes employees to poor working environments, sitting for prolonged hours, poor ergonomics chairs, as well as incorrect postures, and also musculoskeletal discomfort, fatigue, burnout, and stress. And in us seeing that employees are exposed to ergonomic risk factors, we need to now remember that the Occupational Health and Safety Act states that the public service has the responsibility to provide a safe and healthy work environment to its employees. So now with us introducing teleworking during the COVID times, we need to make sure that employees are still protected irrespective of them working from home. We need to also comply with the occupational health and safety regulations. So in us trying to understand teleworking from an ergonomic perspective, we understand that, there are advantages and disadvantages to teleworking. The advantages of teleworking is the flexibility, being able to do work in different locations, less distraction from co-workers, less commuting time, especially for employees that have to take public transport and commute from one province to another every morning. So there's also less distractions in terms of your circadian rhythm, your biological clock, and your sleeping patterns. And also from a financial perspective, those using public transport, they're able to save a bit because of working from home, and it also reduces absenteeism. So the disadvantages now that is coming out of teleworking is that the improper workstation, loss of organizational structures. For example, before COVID, we knew when do you start work, when do you go for tea time, when do you go for lunchtime, when do you knock off? But with COVID, there's just loss of organizational structure. There's a lot of confusion on how to go about doing work, also trying to be productive at the same time. There's also a loss of organizational cultures. A lot of people are now isolating. A lot of people are just, glued to their laptops and, attending Teams meetings. And that whole interaction between co-workers is no longer there. There's a lot of prolonged meeting on Teams and Zoom. There's increased distraction from children. There's no guidelines on how to manage work, and also on how to manage workers from employers' perspective. And there's also changes in sleeping patterns. So with everything that we have learned about teleworking, and that it's actually not a new concept, we're just adjusting to a concept that has already been done. But how can we now link teleworking to ergonomics and also ensuring that we are complying with the OHS regulation? Is that firstly, we can look at our home workstations. By looking at our home workstations, if we still don't have appropriate workstations, the onus is on us to now try find ways that are free from injury, try to find ways that are comfortable so that we are able to continue with work even post the COVID pandemic. So for example, if you have a chair, you may as well just add some cushion for comfort so that you can have enough lumbar support. If you do not have a footrest, and especially for short people, then you can now start looking into maybe adding a platform or base so that you can make sure that your legs are touching the ground. And if you see that when you're working on your laptops, your eyes are not in line with your monitor, then you can just add some books so that, you can just elevate the height a little bit, just to make sure that, you just prevent that excessive bending when you're looking at your laptop, and to make sure that at all times your eyes are always in line with your monitor. And from organizations and also from ergonomics practitioner, we learn, and we have learned that we now need to start providing checklists, or look into providing checklists for employees that are working from home so that they are able to assess their workstations. We need to provide employees with regular online trainings, and also for employers can look into long-term solutions on how they can implement ergonomics guidelines as part of their policies, and also to encourage employees to take frequent rest breaks, and also to find ways on how we can manage our Teams meeting, everything that we are doing online. Because with the lack of resources, with the lack of knowledge between linking ergonomics and teleworking, now we need to be able to distinguish how do we break down the Teams meeting and so forth. So with all the lessons that we have learned during the COVID times, many researchers have tried to find ways on how to balance the two, working from home, implementing ergonomics, and also making sure that employees are managing their time effectively. So the proposed framework shows that, okay, you need to be able to set the time, making sure that you're working for 8 hours, setting the workplace, making sure that the workplace that you're working in is comfortable and there's enough light in where you are working. You have adjusted it according to the appropriate ergonomics standards of when you're sitting at your work table. You need to be able to now prioritize your tasks, also schedule your time and tasks, so that you know that throughout the day, your tasks have been divided into different blocks. Also, find a way on how you can resolve the task for each time, take into consideration time management, ergonomics, and the Internet of Things, and online communication, how we communicate. There needs to be a set time for online meetings, self-control and evaluation. You need to be able to evaluate yourself also on how you're managing your time when you're working from home, to prevent having to work after hours, or having to see your work overlapping into the next day. And as a result, you're very overwhelmed from working from home. And in so doing, as you're trying to find a balance between working from home, also trying to add your home daily commitments into your schedule, and trying to see how do you manage your time while you're doing a bit of home things, picking up your children, and also trying to do work. and also taking a bit of time to rest from the daily activities that you have done, and also preparing for restoring, preparing for sleep, making sure that you're not changing your circadian rhythm. So with teleworking, we've learned that we are able to do work from our different workspaces. I think now it's just a matter of making sure that we identify the different hazards that we're exposed to, the different ergonomic hazards that we're exposed to when we're working from home, and finding ways on how to control it, both from an employee's perspective and also from an organizational perspective, so that we make sure that we are complying with the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Ms. Tatu Malesa, and she's dealt with teleworking. Malesa, I see that there's been, sorry, Tatu, there's been quite a bit of questions already typed in the question answer box. I think some of the questions are specific to ergonomics and some of them to your presentation. There are some questions related to screening when people enter workplaces and so on. The key point there is that we will be having a specific webinar on that topic of, you know, vaccines and the workplace and aspects of entering the workplace tomorrow afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. Okay, so thank you very much, Tato. There is Tato's contact details on the screen if you want to take a quick screenshot or use your, don't close it yet, Tato, or take a quick picture of it with your cell phones. Do that, because my sense is that our speakers are available if you need to contact them for possible follow-up. So a reminder to everybody from an admin point of view, please type your questions to the presenters in the question and answer box. There is an open tab that our presenters will look at, and they will type an answer to your question. It will move over to the answered tab. If people are just saying hello, I'm dismissing your particular typed text there to the dismissed column. For people who are asking in the chat box, will presentations be made available? Toko Sleke is asking. And so Toko, yes, the presentations will be made available. We will just make sure that we have all of our presenters' presentations. It will be uploaded to the NIH's website, and we'll send out an email with the link to everybody who's a confirmed attendee. And for your information, we've reached the maximum of 1,000 attendees that we can accommodate on our current Zoom license. And I have posted in the chat box, I'll repost it so it will be somewhere at the bottom again, the link to the YouTube channel, our NIH YouTube channel. If there are colleagues who are saying they can't get in, please share the YouTube link with them. Thank you, Tatu, for your presentation. Please just have a look at the questions and the question and answer box. And while you are unsharing your slide there, by way of introduction, and I hope I'm going to get my preparation ready here. I've been unfortunately slightly delayed in preparing the slide, so I'm going to potentially not have all of the details there that I should, but I will add a line there. So let me just share with what I have, right? So just one moment, colleagues. As by way of introduction, I will try and then also just maximize the slide. Unfortunately, my PowerPoint skills have been left at home or somewhere, and it's not very helpful today. So I'm going to risk just using the slide as is there, colleagues. My apologies. It is not necessarily the best and what I would have wanted to do. But by way of introduction, Mrs. Sma, my tongue again, Mrs. Sma Nguma Tukulula is a certified ergonomics human factors specialist and a founder of Smart Ergonomics, which is a consultancy that specializes in human factors, ergonomic services, and for various industries, including railway, manufacturing, mining, and the service industries. Her highest qualification is a Master's of Science degree in ergonomics obtained from Rhodes University in 2009. She has over 14 years experience applying human factors ergonomics consulting, training, and research services in a variety of workplaces and industries within the following areas. And here, unfortunately, I have not completed my cut and paste, but there are some of the factors, the human factors, ergonomics compliance, ergonomics risk assessment, ergonomics assessment. And I'm just going to quickly read from my notes here so that I can complete the list. Development and review of various human factors, ergonomics, legislative documents, policies, processes, and procedures. Auditing safety management systems and various human factors, ergonomics requirements. The fourth last bullet is accidents and incident investigations, training and awareness on safety management systems and various human factors, ergonomic topics. The last two is risk management, maturity assessments, and finally research and development on various topics. Sma is also the Vice President of the Ergonomic Society of South Africa, that is ESSA, and an associate member of the Chartered Institute for Ergonomics and Human Factors in the United Kingdom. And with that, I think, very thorough introduction, I'm going to unshare Sma, and if you could please just proceed to share your screen. While that is happening, Isaac, Mokosi, and Zanele Ngwenya, and please lower your hands. Unfortunately, we cannot allow people to speak using microphones. You would Kutala as well. Yes, please type your questions in the question and answer box for our presenters. Right, while Sma is testing our microphone and sharing our
Sorry,
slides.
I've been disabled from sharing my video, and I'm joining from 2 devices. That's probably the reason. So please, can you enable sharing, or else we can share from Zandi's side if it's possible. You can please enable sharing of the video, please.
Okay, well, there's two of your identities on the panelist list, and my understanding is that you have been given in both the right to share. Can you just check
now I can share. Thank you.
You can share, Sma. Sorry about that. You can share.
Thank you very much, Tabani.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
So Sma, that's my colleague Tabani, who is in the Zwane in the IT department, and all the magic you see on the screen is quietly being done is done by him. Please proceed, Sma. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And once again, just thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I'll always, love to participate and share whatever knowledge I've got with people that are interested in our discipline of human factors and ergonomics, which is really still in developmental stages in South Africa. So I'm really, really pleased also to see that we've got such a huge interest and people that are joining in. I hope that we're going to have some time for questions at the end. So what I've been asked to talk about today is ergonomics and basically the lessons learned, in particular with workplaces experiencing COVID. What is the situation when it comes to working conditions before and during COVID from an ergonomics perspective? So that's what the focus of my presentation is going to be. And let me just take my video off because it's a bit distracting. There we go. All right. So what we're going to do today from my presentation is essentially to ask the question, firstly, have working conditions changed following COVID? And if they indeed have, what is the impact? And because we have very limited time, I unfortunately can't get into all the details that I would normally like to, but I'm going to just focus on 3 main areas to try and highlight what are the ergonomics implications with COVID having been at play within workplaces. And in particular, we're going to look at the legislative requirements for managing ergonomic risks in workplaces. We're then going to look and see what has been the impact on work scheduling with the advent of COVID. And then at the end, we're going to focus mainly on musculoskeletal disorders and show what the link between the suboptimal working conditions is with the development of musculoskeletal disorders amongst employees in workplaces. And then we'll just conclude. So it's a very short program. And yes, please ask questions in the chat box and in the Q&A as we go along. So for us to start, let's ask the question, have working conditions actually changed before and after COVID? So if we look at before COVID, a lot of organizations, of course, would have, their contingent of employees in place. And not to say that every single organization out there had the right number of people, but essentially people were available to do work in organizations. And with COVID, what's happened is that as people got infected, as some colleagues passed away, and even with the COVID restrictions that came with having to isolate, we saw huge changes in the number of people that were actually available to do work. And in addition to that, it wasn't only a change in the availability of people to do work in the short term, but also in the long term. A lot of people are experiencing long COVID, which means that absenteeism is not only an issue as they are infected with COVID, but even when they come back to work, they're still probably experiencing some effects associated with long COVID. But what we also saw is that changes in the workplace have obviously also happened, where a lot of organizations who could have been taking on the teleworking format of work, where they're saying, let's try and continue doing work, but let people go and do their work at home, where they're going to be protected essentially from the spread of COVID. And of course, as Tato already indicated, that also came with implications, because it means that now the home is also becoming a workplace. And this is a place that is shared with family members. It's not always the ideal kind of setup. So there are some issues that are coming up in that way. So that obviously is also affecting working conditions. And so while in the past, and I think Tato already looked at the stats around this, in South Africa, we didn't really have a lot of, teleworking or remote working. And typically it was more like freelancers and small business owners who were normally doing, home working or remote working. But essentially, this has become a huge feature of workplaces, especially those who are doing mostly admin kind of work. And so we're seeing a lot of introduction of new technologies and tools that are being used. And that obviously is also changing the way that work is being done. But of course, this is not only about people that are doing office-based work or admin kind of work. There's still a lot of workers who had to continue going to their normal places of work and continue doing that work in the midst of all the issues that come with shortages in staff and changes in the way that work is being done to accommodate COVID requirements. And so particularly for those who have continued to do work at, within the traditional workplaces, we've seen an introduction in a lot of COVID protocols where PPE has to be done, work design has changed to try and encourage physical distancing. There's a lot of changes that have happened. And this, for a lot of organizations that were normally not even used to having to use PPE, having to focus on health and safety related issues or public health issues, this came as a huge shock, and adjustments have to be made to try and accommodate this. So of course, this also introduced changes to the work environment. But if we look at things like, general, risk management, you see in a lot of organizations, and this is across industries, risk management was normally traditionally very compliance based, to say, this is the act, it says this, these are the regulations, they say this, and then we go with the tick box and we say, are we complying, are we complying, are we complying? And in a lot of cases, the risks that organizations were focusing on were mainly on those which were normally going to be of interest for an authority or regulator or an auditor of note. And because of this compliance-driven, approach, we see that when COVID came in, some companies were really frazzled about how do we then do this, because it was dynamic. No one knew what was happening. The risks were manifesting, but it was not really clear, and there was no cut and paste kind of place where people could go to and say, we are just going to do this. So there was a lot of a requirement for people to change, organizations to change the way that they view risk management and move away from compliance-based to actually saying, what are the risks? Let's manage these risks in a dynamic way. And that's exactly what COVID forced organizations to do. And those organizations who thrived in this environment are those who are already adopting risk-based dynamic approach to risk management. And I would like to highlight, obviously, that when it comes to now, particularly to ergonomics, we know that a lot of organizations were actually not even focusing on ergonomics as one of the risks that they need to be managing. And even with the introduction of the ergonomics regulations in 2019, you could still see that all the changes that were being brought in with COVID, people thought the ergonomics regulations were actually a disturbance to them dealing with COVID, without realizing that the regulations were actually going to be a tool to assist them to manage some of these COVID-related changes that were happening in the workplace. So in a nutshell, I think, yes, COVID came, and yes, it brought a lot of changes into the working environment. And of course, depending on the working environment, the changes varied slightly. But in effect, some of these changes that we have seen have meant that there are less people available to do the work. This means that for those who are available, they have to have increased working time to try and meet the targets, because a lot of companies didn't change their performance targets. And what this also means is that the shifts for some organizations had to be increased, or the working times have to be increased. People are spending more time doing work, whether it's at home or in the traditional working environment. People are actually spending more time at work. And this has also been associated with increases in workload that people are being exposed to. And linked to that, fatigue, burnout, stress are some of the other things that people are experiencing because of the changes in the working environment. And then some organizations were struggling financially, so you found that there was a lot of job insecurity, retrenchments, and all of that. That also obviously exacerbated work stress. And in a lot of companies, especially safety critical companies, we started to see that there's a lot of accidents and incidents that are happening. There's a lot of IODs that are happening, and people think it's because people are reckless, people are negligent. But in effect, it's because the changes have been happening across the entire working systems. And these changes are actually contributing to some of these negative effects that we are seeing, mainly because organizations have only looked at COVID as an isolated issue, not realizing that the introduction of this, COVID has actually had an impact not only on the people that are doing the work, but also in the environments that they are doing this work, also on the way that they're doing work in terms of the tasks that they're performing, the way that those tasks are designed. In fact, even the technologies and the tools, the equipment that people are using has also, in a lot of cases, changed. And then the organizations themselves have changed because work scheduling has changed, because decision-making issues have changed, communication has changed, safety culture issues are coming up. And so COVID, people in a lot of cases and organizations are looking at it as a very isolated issue, but in effect, it has had an impact on the entire work systems across organizations. And so then the next question that we're going to ask is, so given the fact that yes, COVID has brought in certain changes, but yes, these changes have caused organizations to do work slightly differently. But what this actually also has meant is that a lot of the changes or a lot of the issues that are coming up are not actually new. Yes, COVID is new, but risk management is not a new concept in a lot of organizations. Work scheduling is not a new concept. Accidents and investigation of accidents is not a new concept. But what COVID has done is exposed some of the gaps and the loopholes that organizations have had for years, in fact. And it has actually, because it has required a more dynamic approach, it has forced organizations to relook the way that they are organizing work, or relook the way that they are managing some of these risks that are within the working environment. And so in the next couple of slides, I'll just demonstrate what this has meant. And essentially, because of the changes in the work system, it meant that the way that work is being done has changed. It meant also that the outcomes have been influenced. So things like the health and safety of workers, things like productivity, quality of output has changed. The way that organizations are doing work has actually changed. And not only because of COVID, but because the impact of COVID has influenced the entire work system. And unfortunately, because these changes have not traditionally been looked at by organizations in a systemic way, it meant that changes were being introduced and there was no cognizance of or consideration of the impact on other aspects or elements of the system. And so we find that there's a lot of instances where the changes in the working environment have meant that the work demands have actually increased and sometimes exceeded the capabilities of the workers that are doing the work. And we are seeing this manifesting in a lot of negative system outcomes, such as inefficient production, high workload, fatigue, stress, absenteeism, even presenteeism. There's a lot of organizations that are also experiencing high turnover. Occurrences are increasing, lots of accidents and incidents, and even non-compliance to legislative requirements. So all of these negative system outcomes, within the discipline of ergonomics, we associate them with the inability of organizations to be fully cognizant of the changes that have occurred within their systems and of the impact that this is having on the people that are doing the work. And so to demonstrate, just using several examples, what has been the impact of changing working conditions because of COVID, particularly in light of legislative requirements. So if, for example, we look at particularly remote working or teleworking, there was a huge debate in a lot of organizations and industries of, if now people are working at home, does that now constitute as a workplace? And if it does constitute as a workplace, what does it then mean in terms of the requirements to, to comply with a lot of the legislative requirements from Basic Conditions of Employment Act, COIDA, OSH Act, ergonomics regulations and such. And I think, yes, there's a lot of debate, but we need to go back to the definition. It says, what is a workplace? And basically any premises or place where people perform work in the course of their employment. So we found that organizations have been sending people home to do work. And therefore, if you also look at the other definition of office technology equipment tools that are used for work, within the machine regulations, it says that whenever machinery is provided by employers, it needs to comply with the health and safety requirements of all of those different legislative requirements. So organizations were sending people to go to work, they were issuing them with equipment, and they were asking them to continue doing work but at home. And therefore, for me, it's not a debate even. Work becomes, home becomes a workplace. But what we have seen is that because of how quickly COVID happened and how the restrictions were quickly imposed and how quickly some of the decisions were being made in organizations, people were just sent home and made to fend for themselves without considering what are the risks that are actually coming with this. And so, as Tato already indicated, a lot of ergonomic risks have been introduced because of this thing of just sending people and not understanding what is the impact in terms of the risks. And then we need to come back to what is the law saying about organizations managing human factors and ergonomic risks. And we know that home is workplace as well. So all of these different legislative requirements will also apply. And so if we look at the OSH Act, it says that organizations need to manage all occupational risks, and this includes ergonomic risks. Mine Health and Safety Act says that ergonomic risks have to be managed there. National Rail Safety Regulator Act, within the rail space, ergonomics has, or human factors as they refer to it in that industry, also has to be managed. Construction regulations even speak about managing ergonomics. And then more recently in 2019, the ergonomics regulations were saying you need to manage ergonomics. So legally, organizations have been required to manage ergonomic risks, whether people are working at home or within the traditional workplaces, but this was actually not being done correctly. So even when the decision was made for people to go work at home, what should have happened is that these legal requirements should have been actually considered in that decision. But what people also miss and don't realize is that all the other labor and compensation related legislation, so any legislation essentially that is talking about managing workers, managing workplaces, will also have implications for managing ergonomic risks. And so we're finding that even though organizations have known and will be implementing a lot of these different legislation, they are doing so in a manner that transgresses the other acts and regulations that say ergonomic risks must be managed. And so when it comes to understanding what has been the impact, let's look particularly at the ergonomics regulations. They are saying before anyone does any work, whether it's at home or within the traditional workplace, there needs to be an ergonomics assessment that is done. And then whatever exposure there is, it has to be prevented or adequately controlled. But most organizations were not doing that. if we look at COIDA and the compensation processes, even there, they talk about the fact that there's a whole lot of things that can be compensated for if people are exposed to risks in the workplace. And even in COIDA, it specifies that, you know, musculoskeletal disorders, for example, are linked to ergonomic risk exposure. And even there, legally, you're supposed to be managing these things for people to be able to be protected and avoiding the compensation that comes with that. And so legally, the requirements have been there. But what we have seen, and I think the lessons that we are taking from this, is that legislation regarding the management of ergonomic risks is there across, in fact, most industries, except maybe, you know, some of the maybe military, because they've got their own requirements there. But most industries have been required to manage ergonomic risks through various legislation. And this includes people that have been doing work at home or in remote locations. And therefore, because home is workplace, it means that all the relevant legislation applies in that context as well. And so what we also saw is that there was a lot of focus on only basic conditions of employment act, but through seeing the impact of some of the ergonomic risks that people are exposed to, we're realizing that some of the implementation of the labor and compensation legislation actually has been transgressing the OSH Act, and that also then has been introducing additional ergonomic risks. And so if we look at things like what should then be done, risk assessments need to be done and include or incorporate ergonomic risks in that. Medical surveillance has to be done. And yes, a lot of organizations might already be doing it, but in a lot of cases, they're not actually identifying the ergonomic risks and the health effects associated with that. And people are already experiencing some of these health effects, but organizations are not aware of what the issues are. And also, what we realized is that a lot of focus has been only on what the worker is doing or what the immediate workstation issues are, without realizing that support structures within the entire organization are contributing to the risks that people are experiencing at the workstation level. And so one of the lessons that need to come from this experience with changes that have come in the working environment because of COVID is that other departments like your HR, procurement departments also need to understand that some of their decisions are contributing to the risks that people are experiencing from an ergonomics perspective. And so even the organizational policies and procedures, the way that work is designed, the safety culture issues, performance targets that are being set, all those decisions are usually made higher up in the organizations. But those people that are responsible for those decisions don't realize that their actions are impacting on introducing some of these ergonomic risks that workers are exposed to. And so obviously empowerment of workers through training and development is important, but it's not only about training the people who are exposed to the risks. It's also about training those who are supporting them in managing these risks. It's also about training the managers who are making decisions that are also impacting on the introduction of ergonomic risks. But because of time, I think we have to move on to the next area that I wanted us to look at. What has been the impact of COVID in workplaces when it comes to work scheduling? So yes, when it comes to COVID, it came with a lot of restrictions, physical distancing restrictions, the number of people that should be in a closed place and all of that. And what that has meant is that a lot of people have worked outside of the working environment. And so what they are reporting is that they're actually working longer. So yes, it's saving them time on the road with traffic and all of that, but the implication is that people are working longer. They're having less rest breaks, and there are so many blurred lines between what work is and what home is, and there isn't enough opportunity to actually get a break from work. But for those who are working and continue to work in normal environments, some of them, because of shortages, have been asked to work for longer shifts. Others are even being asked to come and work during their rest days to cover for the shortages. Others are having fewer rest breaks in between to try and cover the performance targets. And others are having to work shifts when normally they hadn't been working shifts. And all of this is to try and cover up for the impact on staffing issues that have been linked to COVID, and in some instances because of retrenchments. And so what we're finding is that even some of the basic conditions of employment requirements in terms of work scheduling are being transgressed because people are saying, well, we need to manage. It's crisis, it's COVID. But that has been coming with other emergent risks such as fatigue, such as workload, negative safety culture, accidents, and the like. And what we're seeing in a lot of cases is that there's this reinforcement of this negative way of scheduling work, where you just get people to work, and only once they are like completely tired, you give them a rest. But by then, normally they're sick and they are away from work for longer. And we are seeing this even with COVID, where instead of getting people to work and rest regularly, we are working them until they are so tired and that they actually can't do any work for even longer periods of time. But secondly, we're seeing a lot of instances where we are still using the same old policies and procedures and risk controls that we were using before COVID. But the situation has changed. It's become so messy. The requirements need us to look at things differently. They need us to update our policies and procedures so that they speak directly to some of the issues that people are experiencing. And so what are the lessons that we're taking from this is that, yes, there's changing working schedules, but because we're not realizing the risks that come with this from an ergonomics perspective, it means that we're also not aware of the negative health and safety and performance consequences that come with this. Also, work schedules have often been linked with increased exposure to different hazards. So not only COVID now, because people are working longer in the working environment, it means that if before they were exposed to vibration, it means they're exposed to vibration for longer. If they were exposed to any other risk, whether it's ergonomic risks or any other health and safety risks, because they are working for longer, they are exposed to those things for longer, which means that the impact would be even worse. It also, what we've also seen is that some of the changes that have been made, particularly around work scheduling, effectively have rendered most working environments or conditions actually unfit. So yes, we've had to adapt and we've had to work with really bad options available. However, the reality is that most of these working conditions are really unfit. And therefore, because they're unfit, they're contributing to some of the systemic failures that we are seeing in operations. And they are also actually cultivating the grounds upon which accidents, incidents, and injuries are actually coming through. But in addition to this, we're seeing that a lot of organizations were making changes without doing the risk assessments or any other ergonomics assessments. And therefore, even the controls that are coming from that are actually not speaking to the actual ergonomic risks that are manifesting. And also, and I really want to reiterate this, a lot of the decisions about how to manage COVID-related disruptions at work are normally coming at higher levels of the organization. Those decisions normally are made without taking into account the ripple effect that these decisions eventually have in introducing ergonomic risks that eventually manifest at the worker level, at the shop end. And so what we are seeing is that people are having workload issues, fatigue, they're having a lot of errors, accidents, and then they are then getting blamed for experiencing these things without realizing that the reason why this is happening is because of the systemic failures, because of the decisions that were made higher up in the organization. And so we need to learn from that so that whoever is making those decisions can take that into account. But also because of the poor processes in making decisions about work scheduling, workers are effectively inheriting risks that are linked to these poor work schedules, and then ultimately they get blamed for the negative consequences that come with that. And I think the lesson to take from this is that we need to be aware that yes, COVID might be one risk factor, but it filters throughout the entire system, and therefore anyone who's contributing to the management of work systems need to understand what ergonomic risk they are introducing in that. And I can see that I've got, I think, 5 minutes left, so I'm going to rush to the next, the last section that we wanted to go through here. And the next one was to say, yes, COVID came in, and it came in and it made a lot of changes in the workplace. And I've already indicated that a lot of the changes that have been made have actually deteriorated the conditions of work. The work conditions have become suboptimal. And one of the consequences of that is that people are being exposed to risks that are making them start developing musculoskeletal disorders. And we know that musculoskeletal disorders are a huge issue worldwide, and they are becoming a huge concern because they've got a debilitating effect on people. They can't do their work properly. They have to leave work earlier because they are basically unable to continue. And then with COVID, we've realized that because people are exposed to more of these musculoskeletal disorder-related risk factors, the prevalence of musculoskeletal disorders is actually likely to increase. And we're actually seeing that as we are interacting with organizations. And so if we look at the research, this is before COVID now, already the prevalence rates were very high. If we look at what is in red, lifetime prevalence in Africa generally was posited to be around 47%. Annual prevalence, so people have said in the last year, I've experienced musculoskeletal lower back issues, about 57% of workers. And then at that point, when people were asked the question if they've got musculoskeletal disorders like lower back pain, 39% were saying that they've got issues. And if you see the numbers, on the African continent, the prevalence of musculoskeletal disorders is high. In fact, if we look at some of the research that has been done specifically in South Africa across people that are doing office-based work in the mining sector, people that are driving, long-distance drivers in the hospitals, in mining sector, construction, you're seeing that the prevalence rates before COVID were already high. And now we know that the conditions have deteriorated. People are exposed to more of these COVID-related risks, and therefore it is very likely that the prevalence rates have increased. However, organizations are not necessarily measuring this. And so what are the lessons? Is that yes, working conditions in a lot of organizations have deteriorated because of COVID-19, and workers are exposed to more of these risks and for longer periods of time. And we've seen actually when we've done some of these assessments that more and more workers are already experiencing MSD symptoms, and some are even having to take medication to deal with the pain. Others are saying that they've been absent from work to deal with some of these issues. However, organizations don't actually understand how big this issue is because they're not measuring it. Their medical surveillance is not covering it. Their risk assessments are not realizing that this is a risk. And therefore, we find that this is probably going to continue unmanaged, and more people are going to be experiencing risks that could actually be mitigated if ergonomic risk assessments were done properly, if the assessments to quantify the exposures were done properly, and if the appropriate controls were being introduced. And what we know from case studies, both locally and internationally, is that the prevalence of MSDs can actually be reduced through introducing things like ergonomics programs that will deal directly with some of the risk factors that are associated with this. And I think one of the biggest lessons here is that just because you're not measuring it doesn't mean that the issues are not there, and companies are going to start needing to measure these things more effectively. And so when we conclude, I think it's very clear that yes, COVID-19 introduced some changes into the workplaces, and some of these changes have actually introduced certain risks new risks into the organizations, but also there are a lot of other old risks that were not being managed properly that are actually coming up more and more within workplaces. And also in dealing with these risks, a lot of organizations have actually been exposed in terms of being deficient in the way that they are currently managing risks, including and particularly ergonomic risks, which normally have not been managed adequately in organizations. And so we need to move away from this compliance-based risk management, especially with ergonomic risks, because they are really dynamic. You can find that the risk will change from the time that the person is coming on to work at the beginning, and the risk is very different at the end of the shift. So we need to adopt more risk-based and dynamic risk management approaches to deal with these ergonomic risks in workplaces. But also organizations were normally not managing human factors and ergonomic risks. And therefore, when COVID came, they were even more vulnerable to the effects of the risks, and those especially that were highlighted because of COVID. And this we are seeing in some of the outcomes linked to compromised worker health and safety, compromised productivity of output, and general organizational outputs have been compromised. And so we know that while the management of ergonomic risks is mandatory because it's legislated, that's not the main reason why organizations should be looking into that. Yes, it's legislated and you must do it, but because of the impact that it's actually having on the organization's bottom line as well as on the workers, we really need to manage these ergonomic risks, especially because of the COVID-related challenges that come in. And so we know that through evidence, through case studies, integrating human factors and ergonomics, organizations that have actually integrated into the safety management systems have been better able to manage these risks in a comprehensive, proactive, and sustainable manner. And this is really much needed now, especially with the effects of COVID, because organizations don't realize that this has actually exacerbated the ergonomics issues. And in fact, if we take this more proactive approach now, whenever we get most of these, any future disruptions that come into the workplace, because organizations will already have this resilience built in through having adopted some of these ergonomics programs, it will actually assist them to deal with future issues as well. And so to basically reiterate some of the solutions that need to be implemented based on the lessons that we have learned with the introduction of ergonomic risks associated with COVID, I think we essentially need to take a more systems-based approach. We need to take introduce ergonomics programs that will then effectively help organizations to effectively identify the hazards and the risks, do ergonomics assessments, have better education and awareness, medical surveillance that actually incorporates assessments for ergonomic risk exposures, as well as making sure that whatever controls we have are implemented properly, and structuring and designing our organizations better, having policies and procedures that actually understand what are the interactions within the system, where are the vulnerable points within the system, where are the ergonomic risks, and then deal with them in a systemic way. From my side, I think that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, SMA. And that was SMA dealing with the working conditions before and during COVID-19. Okay, so if you could close your slide there for a moment. There's been quite a bit of positive response to the first two presentations, Tato's and SMA's. There's just so many comments here, I can't go through all of them. Maybe just to pick one. Thank you, SMA, very informative presentation. This needs to be shared with the organization. And very informative presentation indeed. Managers have to participate in these webinars, and that was from Mashishi, Cynthia, as well as from Nobayeni Masemola. So thank you very much, SMA. There are quite a lot of questions people have typed in the question and answer box. I'm going to encourage you, SMA, to go straight to the question and answer box and to look at some of the questions. Some of them are also for you directly. I'm going to, there's about quite a bit, there's about 36 questions that is still not been answered. If they are just general admin ones, I deal with them quickly. Okay, so a reminder then, we have reached the 1,000 maximum login limit on our Zoom license platform. I have posted earlier the YouTube link where in fact in future there will be a full recording of this webinar as well. It's currently being streamed live. And then a quick answer to those people with regard to the CPD certificates for those who do belong to professional bodies that are accredited. Not all professional bodies are accredited, but there are a handful that are for our COVID-19 webinars. That particular link and the multiple choice question test will be circulated within a day or two after the webinar is completed. And with a bumper attendance, it might be slightly longer for that to happen. And I'll encourage you, please visit our NIOH website. That is www.nioh.ac.za, www.nioh.ac.za. It is zero rated. So if you visit our website, you will not be charged any data and so on to visit. And all of our previous, I think I should say 95 or 96 webinars, plus minus, the presentations and so on are all on our website, and all the video recordings are on the YouTube channel, etc., and other resources around COVID-19 is there. So yes, we've had teleworking by Tato and working conditions before and during COVID-19 by SMA. And now I have the pleasure to introduce, and before she shares her slides, I'm just sort of experimenting with this, introducing people using the current slides here, and I'm going to try and share this quickly again. And unfortunately, I've not been all that organized. So I'm going to have to just maximize the actual information I want to share with you. One moment. And so the next and final presenter is my colleague, Ms. Zandile Hoyi, who is the principal medical scientist in the ergonomics unit, 2 floors down within the occupational medicine section at the National Institute for Occupational Health. Her role at the NIH involves providing ergonomic services in terms of training and risk assessments. Ms. Hoyi holds a master's in science in human kinetics and ergonomics from Rhodes University. While studying at Rhodes, Ms. Hoyi worked at the university in the capacity of a facilitator in the Department of Human Kinetics and Ergonomics. She then became an ergonomics consultant, conducting research in military ergonomics. Her experience spans across the domains of specializations in ergonomics. Short and sweet. I'm going to ask my colleague Zandile, who's done 99% of the work of making this webinar happen and is contributing as a presenter, asking her to share her slides and open her microphone. And as a quick reminder to everybody, please, your questions in the question and answer box. I'm going to ask Tato and Smart to continue answering the questions there. And by way of introduction, the current head of the occupational medicine section here at the NIH, that's Dr. Nompumelelo Ndaba, is also helping us as a panelist at the moment in answering some of the questions there, because some of the questions are kind of vaccine related, the whole question of what is it called, monitoring when people enter workplaces, etc. All of those additional questions. For those who wants to join tomorrow's webinar, we have circulated that webinar invitation to everybody who I think was also on this mailing list. We will be doing a reminder as well. If you've not received the webinar, I'm going to encourage you to put your email address in the chat box and I will respond to you there from there. So thank you very much, Zandile. I see your slide is maximized and shared. I hand over to you immediately. Please proceed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. I hope everyone can hear me correctly. Welcome once again, colleagues. And in this presentation, we'll be looking closely at the cognitive aspects of working during COVID-19, which are often overlooked, and not even just during COVID-19, but in work instances in general. So I'm hoping to shed some light in terms of what are these cognitive aspects, what this domain of ergonomics entails, and what have the lessons, or maybe what have the impact of the restrictions and everything going on with COVID, and how that has impacted the cognitive processes and aspects of work and the workers. So just to look at the outline of the presentation, we'll be going through the domains of specialization, just again, giving a broad overview of what ergonomics is, look at the aim of cognitive ergonomics, go through what coronavirus pandemic has necessitated within society, look at ergonomics in COVID-19, and then lastly, look at the lessons that we have learned through this process. So just to reiterate some aspects that my colleagues have presented on, ergonomics is looked under these three general domains or umbrellas of domains, which are physical ergonomics, which we have touched on, which the MSD prevalence falls under mainly, which where we look at human anatomy, biomechanics, physiology, and anthropometry. And then we also have organizational ergonomics, where we deal then with the socio-technical systems, environment, participation, coordination, and also the work design that Smai had spoken about will factor into that aspect of the ergonomics. And then lastly, we have cognitive ergonomics, which places focus around issues such as memory, or processes rather, such as memory, perception, attention, and in a broader sense, communication. So in terms of human factors in ergonomics, the discipline often takes a multidisciplinary approach in viewing the worker in their work environment. We're not only looking at the worker in terms of the physical components of the work, but also we look at, like I said, the cognitive aspects and other work design and other organizational aspects. And we use these technical disciplines to work together in order to actually view the worker in a holistic manner. So we do take some knowledge and expertise from the various disciplines to then actually understand the work and how that affects the worker. So the aim of cognitive ergonomics is to describe how work affects the mind and vice versa, how the mind affects the work. This typically takes into consideration the reliability of performance, and in particular, cognition, looking at various topics under the domain, such as mental workload, decision-making, how humans interact with machinery and computers, work stress, and so on and so forth. We take into consideration the cognitive functions that a person goes through, or the mental processes that a person goes through in interacting with the other elements within their system. And we often term these as, like, brain-based skills, where we aim to enhance the performance whilst performing cognitively demanding tasks. And interventions to deal with that include user-centered design of human-machine interaction, as well as human-computer interaction. So this would then be looking at how does the individual interact with, let's say, a computer? How do they interact with whatever vibrating machinery that they're using to perform their task? And considering the physical aspects of them, we also look at what's the cognitive processes that are needed to actually perform their task using these relevant machinery and products. We also look at the design of information technology systems that support cognitive tasks, and that could be, for instance, software. How does the process, what does the process take for a person using a software to get to the optimal outcome? Does the process frustrate the worker, or does it facilitate that thinking process that the worker or the individual goes through? And then we also look at work redesign to manage cognitive workload and also increase human reliability. So these are just some of the interventions that we typically use within this discipline of ergonomics. So in terms of the work, or the science of work rather, during such a peculiar time of COVID-19, we've seen that such a virus has necessitated the restriction or a series of restrictive control to be put in place, such as lockdowns, physical distancing, isolations, as well as the use of PPE amongst many. But how has this impacted the worker in their workplace in terms of ergonomics? We've also seen a great deal of evidence that our healthcare system, not only just in South Africa, but globally, is not adequately designed to support human performance for a large-scale health crisis like the one we have experienced. And like Sma has also alluded to, other industries we're not sure how to react to such a change in work, or an element producing change in work. We saw that there was the systematic consideration of complexities, not only of just, like I said, the physical aspects, but of human cognition and behavior in a pandemic preparation response were also lacking, meaning there were a lot of things overlooked, and that renders some point of not viewing every control measure that is put in place and what the residual risks thereafter will mean. So in terms of then looking at what lessons we might have learned, we've seen in terms of mental health, we've seen a high prevalence of acute stress, anxiety, and depressive symptoms during this point in time. And this has had a huge impact on mental health of persons, and not only just in terms of work, but also in terms of the confinement based on the lockdown regulations. We've seen that temporal perception has been one of the relevant aspects that have emerged during the pandemic, which deals with the perception of time, where in the first lockdown, it was seen that a slowdown in perception of time was associated with older age, increased stress, reduced workload, and lower levels of social interactions, and rightfully so, because of the whole physical and social distancing that was put in place. Additionally, in younger adults, a slower perception of time was associated with higher levels of depression, anxiety, and stress. And because of this slowed perception of time, it was seen to be higher during lockdown as opposed to before that. And bringing that back into cognitive processes of someone, this is highly associated with, or rather perception of time is highly associated with prospective memory, which is the ability to remember and therefore perform planned activities at some point in the future. So in terms of a worker having to, let's say a frontline worker having to attend to a patient at a particular time, being a life or death experience, because of the perception of slow time, the attention is affected, meaning they might get to the patient at a later stage as they wanted to. So it is important to understand that COVID as a stressful event, and with the additions of confinement, has been seen to have an impact on cognitive processes. And this is just one example, looking at one industry that can also be effective in other industries. Looking into sensory perception, we see that one of the COVID-19 symptoms was the loss of smell. And we often use our sensory channels to obtain data from our environment. And we use that data and information to make decisions on, be it social, related decisions, work-related decisions, or even survival decisions. And then looking at the typical classes of smell, we typically associate smell or relate smell to ingestion, social communication, as well as environmental hazards. So if a person requires this particular channel of sensory perception to conduct their task at work, or it requires them to be vigilant of environmental hazards in their workplace, by removing or losing that sense of smell, the person is already, their performance is already altered, and it might be impacted negatively. And in the instance of survivability, that might be putting them in a space to endanger themselves and just place them in harm's way. So it might seem like a small element of just losing smell, but how does that then also translate to the person's performance in terms of performing their work, or even ensuring that they stay safe within the environment? Other, in terms of then losing one sense of a sensory perception or a sensory channel, we typically use redundancy to assist with that. So we would then use visual or auditory channels to say, there has been a leakage in this area, please evacuate, something to that effect, to then compensate for this loss of sensory channel. So it might, like I said, look like it's something small, but it might have an enormous impact on the performance, safety, and health of an individual. Looking at the use of PPE, that was quite prevalent in terms of ensuring that persons remain safe as best as they can in terms of COVID-19. Research has found that PPE has impacted a number of things, including visual and auditory perception, gait and balance, or the manner in which a person walks and they balance in that, cognitive functioning in general, as well as communication and teamwork. So if we look at the picture of the two personnel in the screen, we see that they've donned this PPE so that they can perform their work safely. And it has been quite evident that it was critical, especially in the high peaks of infection during COVID-19. Now, what was found was also that PPE discomfort was associated with impairment to some performance, because you're not now focusing on what you're doing. You're focusing on the fact that this PPE is uncomfortable. It's maybe having some contact pressure on you, and your focus is then placed on that contact pressure as opposed to what you're doing. So in terms of ergonomics, another aspect of that is to ensure that PPE comfort is comfortable to use and is donned on correctly for the purpose of it. Additionally, hearing and speech comprehension was found to impact performance. And again, looking at the picture on the screen of the workers, they say they've done that PPE and they have some distance between them where they have to communicate, and there's also ambient noise within the environment. The communication between the two personnel is impaired, meaning their performance as individuals and perhaps also as a team might also be impaired. So such incorporations of control measures, they might assist in ensuring that the person is protected in one manner, but some other element or issue might be brought about, and that also needs to be considered in terms of control measures. So looking at the take-home messages from not only this presentation, but from today, we can understand that ergonomics is about more than just the physical aspects of work. We should consider the worker in their work environment, in their environment, be it in terms of physical, cognitive, or systematic factors. It is also important to consider how the work affects the mind and vice versa, because that will affect not only the performance of the worker, but also the well-being and just ensuring that they conduct their work safely. And lastly, the impact of COVID-19 on work should not be in vain. We've seen that there is an impact as previously presented by our panelists. So all these lessons that should be learned from what has been should necessitate some change in work done, in the manner in which work is seen to be done, and also how the control measures put in place are thought of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that was Zandile Hoyi, having dealt with the question of cognitive aspects of working during COVID-19. And that was the third of the series of presentations we've had today. And we have quite a good time for dealing with questions. And so whilst my colleagues are also, typing questions there in the question and answer box, we'll probably answer most of these live during our Q&A session. So our three topics that we've had, you'll see the contact details there for Zandile on the screen. Please take a quick screenshot or use your, mobile cell phone camera to take a quick shot there if you need to get in touch with her. So our first topic was on teleworking. That was by Tatu, and the second one was working conditions before during COVID-19 by SMA. And the third one was the cognitive aspects of working during COVID-19. And whilst we are going to deal with the Q&A, I'm just going to quickly have that particular screen of the program for you online there. I think it's this one. So I'm just quickly needing to get to the program itself, maximize it and make sure that it stays there. One moment. Okay, so and can I just quickly check with people, are you seeing the presenter screen, or are you seeing the only the one single box?
We see the program.
Yes, is it only one single box, Babani?
Yes, sir, it's maximized.
Okay, thank you very much. It's not the mistake I made earlier. Okay, so yes, today's topic is the ergonomics and COVID-19. What are the lessons learned? We've had approximately 2 years of since the arrival of this new novel SARS-CoV-2 virus that had reached the shores and our workplaces here in South Africa as well. And we've had Tatu Sman Zandile give their presentations. And I'm going to quickly go to the Q&A box. There's been lots of congratulations there as well back in the chat box. We're going to focus for now on the question and answer box. So there's a question, and this I'm directing at our three presenters and Pome to you as well, Dr. Ndaba. So the first question I'm looking at it quickly is I think it's related to this whole question of screening. So maybe Dr. Ndaba and Pome, if you could just quickly touch on this. Irvin Vermeulen wants to know, is taking temperature still a legal requirement with screening, as a lot of companies have moved away from this and only doing symptom screening? Elaine Free asked something related. Is daily screening now only required, or do we still need to complete the daily register? And then there's Anonymous. Please, Anonymous, we prefer your questions to be known so that we have a good record of who's asked questions and what we've answered. Do we still have to take the temperature, and is everyone twice a day, residents as well as staff? And so you get the drift there. Again, Elaine, about the daily screening registers. Could I ask you, Mpumi, just to open your microphone and assist us with this just broadly? And my sense is that it will probably come up in tomorrow's webinar as well. Over to you, Mpumi. Thanks.
Good day, colleagues. Thank you, Ashraf. Just a quick one. The temperature screening, it may not necessarily on its own be, enough as a screening. So the question basically is it still a legal requirement? Not really on its own, but the requirement is we should continue doing screening in workplaces, and it's up to the workplace to determine which set of screening tools they can use. But it has been a part of a number of other screening tools, including symptom screening, symptom monitoring, and so forth. So it may not necessarily, it's not just about temperature, it has always been about temperature together with other measures that you could use in the workplace, or even some subjective means of assessing, do you have fever or not? But this will be provided in much more detail in tomorrow's session or webinar. Thanks.
Thanks. That's Dr. Nompumelelo Ndaba, the current head of our occupational medicine section here at the NIH. And Elaine Fourie, we're not going to go into the further questions you've timed there on the screening of registers and how long they should be retained. We are going to move over to just the ergonomic specific questions. Thanks. Okay, so the next question to our panel of presenters and panelists, Dr. Ndaba, is with the increase of working from home, WFH, what is the employer obligations to provide ergonomically correct and safe furniture to the employee, desk, chair, etc. So if anybody of our panelists may want to just open their microphone and deal with that, go ahead, Mpome, I see your hands up.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashraf. The question on provision of furniture, I think I'm going to try and tie that up with other questions that I've answered on the Q&A. So we know that COVID came just after the economic regulations had been promulgated, and not just focusing on compliance, but these regulations were helping us to steer our direction on what should be done. The crux on the economic regulations is there has to be a risk assessment. So the first thing, the risk assessment doesn't need that the employer may physically go to the work to the home to check your home, but the risk assessment is trying to say who's going to be working from home and who will not be. And as part of that, also offer some awareness training on the economic hazards that people may need to identify in different home environments. Are you able to do this? Economics doesn't refer to the physical hazards, but it talks also to the cognitive hazards. How long are you going to be, let's say, working on the computer, or maybe being in meetings, and all those different factors as a way of saying, this is a baseline sort of risk assessment or a tool that you could also complete and start to identify some activities that you do at home, how you do that, and so forth. I'm just going to end there because the issue of procurement of furniture for home, I'm not going to comment on that. I see Sma might probably be commenting on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mpome. Sma, your hand's up. Please open your microphone and proceed. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. I think I'd like to add to Dr. Ndaba's response, and just to caution that usually it's not just about the desk or the chair. So yes, it might be the desk, but until you have done an actual risk assessment and understood what are the current working conditions and what are the risks that come with that, you shouldn't jump to then just buy whatever. So I've seen a lot of companies will just say, okay, we'll buy everyone sit-stand desks, yet the issue might not actually be that at all. And so once again, it's about understanding the actual issues at the workstation, but not only at the workstation, look at the physical, cognitive, organizational factors, and understand what's the best course of action there. But it's difficult. Of course, it's difficult because it's people's homes, but there are some good practices out there about how do you go about doing these assessments, either remotely, capacitating people to do some of these assessments themselves, so that you can get the information required to make the decisions about how do you manage the risk that they're exposed to in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Sma, there was Mike Townsend who said to you directly in the question and answer box, which should have been in the chat box, Mike. He's saying, I will send you an email and maybe we can follow up with an MS Teams meeting. Thanks for the prompt response. One of the issues we were tough on was the reviewing of risk assessments on an ongoing basis, especially post a positive case. That's from Mike Townsend. There was also a question, Sma, I think it was for you, I'm not sure, in the Q&A box, and I'm going to struggle to find it. I think it's to do with an abbreviation, MSD. I'm not sure if that was your presentation. Sma, can you quickly deal with that? What does the abbreviation MSD stand for? Thanks.
Oh, musculoskeletal disorders. Others, they'll use work-related, WRMSD, work-related musculoskeletal disorders. So things like back pain, carpal tunnel syndrome, and the like.
Thank you very much. We've covered that now as well. Yes. Okay. So if I can quickly then go to Bernard Siopa, my question is with regard to whether vaccination at work is a must or not. Bernard, join tomorrow's webinar. I'm going to post our YouTube channel link in the chat. Please make sure everybody copies that, because I suspect tomorrow's event is also going to be oversubscribed with regard to our maximum of 1,000 logins on our Zoom platform. And then you can follow live on the YouTube, the streaming of tomorrow's vaccine-specific event. I see Tato's answering Jacques Stiard. Is there responsibility for the employer to, example, provide a chair for employees working from home? It's also related to what Dr. Ndaba has asked earlier, so I'm going to leave Tato to continue to answer that. And then Busi Giliana, apologies, with a lockdown over and most things back to normal. Yeah, I'm not sure. Are there regulations to support and promote working from home for employees who wishes to continue to do so? Tato, could I invite you just to do that live and open your microphone? I know that you have started to answer Busi there with regard to the issue about, assuming a return to some form of so-called normality. Are the regulations support and promote working from home for employees who wishes to continue to do so? Or are we expecting, the Department of Employment and Labor or the Department of Health to possibly consider that? Tata, over to you. Your microphone's open. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. In answering Busi's question in terms of are there any regulations to support or promote working from home for employees who wish to do so? Unfortunately, in the regulation, there's nowhere where it stipulates how do we need to go about employees who would like to continue to work from home. So I think the onus is going to depend on organizations on how they want to do things post-COVID. We cannot tell organizations on how to do things post-COVID, but we can guide organizations that for employees that are wishing to work from home, we need to make sure that we are protecting those employees and making sure that their home offices are free from any ergonomics risk injuries.
Thank you very much for that, Tata. And maybe just whilst you're on with microphone open, you've been looking at the questions, you've been answering some of them, and I think you're still busy answering one or two there. What are some of the key questions that have come up in the question and answer box that was, I think, important for you to perhaps to share with a broader audience when answering individuals? Tata?
Most of the key questions that came out from the presentation is mostly do employers need to, look into buying furniture, ergonomic furnitures for their employees that are working from home, and I think Dr. Ndaba has touched on that. And some of the things that are coming up is that people are highlighting that with working from home, many people are complaining about lower back pain, and people are complaining about prolonged sitting from working from home. So those are the two things that were coming up mostly from the questions. Is it the employer's responsibility to provide employees with furniture? How do we go about mitigating the risk factors that employees that are working from home are exposed to? So those are some of the themes that came out from the questions that most people are asking.
Thank you very much. And so to all our presenters as well, I would assume, okay, let me not assume gender. Somebody from the Central Bank of Lesotho. It is one of the last questions. It is the last question in the question answer box. I hope I'm pronouncing the name properly. Joane Tobake. I think the person needs your contact details. Please, if you could just add your contact details there in reply to that particular person. Well, it's the second last one now. And perhaps engage with some communications with that. I'm going to click answer live. It will be in the answered box. I'll leave it there in the open box for now. Okay, so Lulia has got a different question. Okay, so I'm not going to go there. That's not topic related. There is Danica Rizant. I'm a bit confused with regards to mandatory wearing of masks, but not outside. Does this mean when I'm walking alone, I don't have to wear, or if I'm outside with other people, then I don't have to wear? Okay, let me repeat that. I need further clarity there. And maybe I should ask Dr. Ndaba to prepare to answer this. I'm a bit confused, says Danica, with regards to mandatory wearing of masks, but not outside. Does that mean that when I'm walking alone, I don't have to wear a mask? Or if I'm outside with other people, I guess that is, then I do have to wear it. Mpome, if you could just, the issue of masks, there has been some shifts. The president has spoken in a family meeting, and the regulations will be amended. Over to you, Mpome. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashraf. Apologies, I'm not going to expand on that. There is a webinar that is planned on, touching on the latest, guidelines. It specifically, sort of explain some of the background issues around this, the issue of masks. There's also emphasis on ventilation and all those. So it's not just, a one size fits all, but it is very true. If you're alone in the office, it sort of says if you are, in a public space, I think it says that in a public space or in contact with other people, then you have to wear a mask. But obviously when you are alone, that is where now the derivations come in, where you might not necessarily have to wear a mask. But also, if you're outside, it's very clear that you don't have to. But for the sake of time, can I rather request that the person joins the webinar? I think it's going to be advertised sometime next week, and clarity is going to be provided there.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Ashraf, can I also take this time to also address an issue about the OHSS system? Somebody was asking, is it still working? I've been trying to send questions there. I think on the very banner that you have at the bottom, there is the email address for the OHSS. If not, please email me. I tried to write my email address. They email me when you have a question relating to, do we still submit? Can we submit? Or what do we submit? If you don't, or maybe as you email that, please copy me so that I can make sure that I facilitate fast response on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Ndaba. And a reminder, as she's pointed you to the bottom, to the email or banner there at the bottom with certain key details, you'll see there's also a workplace hotline number that's 0800212175. 0800212175. You might want to direct questions there. You could also direct questions to the info email address. That's the one at the bottom in the middle, info@nih.ac.za. We might not cover everything in today's webinar. We've got about 15 minutes left. And if we don't cover something, you have the email address, info@nih.ac.za, to direct your questions and follow up, indicate which webinar you attended and what your question is, and it will be directed in the right direction. Or you can call the hotline number 0800212175. And a reminder, our website, www.nih.ac.za, www.nioh.ac.za is zero rated. So if you visit there, and you will find a whole lot of COVID-19 resources. All of the resources, recording and presentations of this webinar will also be posted there, and you'll be notified of that. Thank you very much for that. So there was a quick one, if I could just find it. Okay, could you recommend a specific good practice with regard to conducting ergonomic risk assessments, especially for the home office? So any of our colleagues, Zandile, Sma, Tato, who may want to open your microphones and also, contribute to add to what each other might say. This question by Mike Townsend: could you recommend a specific good practice with regard to conducting an ergonomic risk assessment, especially for the home office? My sense, obviously, until one of my colleagues join us, Sma, go ahead, is that there is a standard process probably of doing the risk assessment. You'll have to obviously update that. Sma, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I think that's actually a very good question, and it's come up so regularly in interactions with organizations. When it comes to the actual a document that's written in South Africa, I will be honest, I haven't seen one specifically, but internationally they are starting to come out, and some are published in journals. So maybe get in touch and I'll try and see if I can't find one that I can share with you. But what I think what's important is that whatever you are doing, just ensure that you're doing an actual office ergonomic risk assessment if it's an office workstation. A lot of the times when I've seen these reviewed risk assessments, supposed risk assessments, they're actually just checklists. But the ergonomics regulations are very clear on what should be and included in the risk assessment. So just make sure that you are complying with the requirements of the regulations, but also there are established tools that we have available within the ergonomics literature that have been validated and are used to do actual risk assessments for officers. Of course, even with those, they have limitations. So for example, there's one, the ROSA questionnaire, for example, which only focuses on the physical aspects of the workstation. And therefore you need to fortify that with additional assessments, which will look at the cognitive aspects as well as the organizational factors as well, that all contribute. So what I normally suggest is, depending on what you are assessing, go and look for the most appropriate tools, and you will probably end up with several different tools that will help you cover and assess the physical, cognitive, and organizational factors that are relevant there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Zandile, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ashraf. I think just to build on to what Sma was saying, and also from what I've experienced, is that a number of the assessments that have been done have looked at what is typically seen as ergonomics, and like we have said, it looks at just the table and just the chair, and that it ends there. So it is important also for the people conducting these assessments to be knowledgeable and trained in identifying these ergonomic hazards, because one could say that yes, we've done an ergonomic risk assessment, but was it thorough? Was it done identifying all these particular and important ergonomic hazards, and also then the implementation of the control measures? Are they effective? And like Smile says, the regulations stipulate exactly what this assessment should have and how it should be done, considering the type of work that is conducted and when they should be done. So it is important that that background knowledge is put in place. Thanks, Chair.
So thank you very much. Tati, if you want to come in, just, do that. The next question I want to deal with, I see, Tati, you've answered the question on the MSD there. There was some question about following up on the MSD. I know you've answered it already, so I can't see it on my screen. Do you perhaps want to sort of comment on that particular question and your answer? Before I allow Sma, Tata, go ahead. You want to unmute your microphone?
I think if I remember the question was on how do we distinguish that the nature of injury is MSD from working from home, or it's just natural MSD, if I can remember the question well. So my answer in that question is that employees who have any chronic MSDs, they need to provide certificates to show that they probably have gone through an operation or anything that could have resulted in them having a chronic MSD. And this will allow us to be able to look and analyze if the MSD is happening from a perspective of how the work is being done, or how employees adapt to different working postures when they're sitting at work. So if somebody is suffering from a back injury, it could be maybe that they've gone through an operation, and if they haven't gone through any operation or whatever, then it's most likely that the injury stems from how work is being done at their different workstations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the question by Keto Magwaza was, how do we differentiate between a compensatable MSD and a natural one, especially with people working from home? How will the employer tell if the MSD was work-related or not? Sma, you want to follow up there? Please proceed. Thanks.
Yes. So when they're investigating for compensation purposes, all they need to establish is whether the risks that could have led to that negative health effect or illness or disorder was actually prevalent or existing in the working environment. And if it was, if they can confirm that that risk factor or those risk factors are in that working environment, then that person will be eligible. So that means that if I've got an MSD because I do renovations over the weekend at home, as well as do work in the working environment where I'm exposed to MSD-related risk factors, that won't matter. So long as those risks are prevalent in the working environment and they can confirm this, then you are eligible for compensation. And normally what companies fail to do, or not really doing well, is their risk assessments, because as a company you can show, well, yes, the risk might have been there, but this is what we have done to alleviate or mitigate the risk. But most companies are not even identifying these ergonomic risks comprehensively. So yes, even if it was supposedly natural, so long as that risk was, the person was exposed to that risk at work, then it will be eligible, with obviously other things that need to be looked at as well.
Thanks, Ma. So I'm not sure if Mpome, Dr. Ndaba wants to come in here, but I think that the occupational medicine section is also going to be conducting awareness and training sessions on this particular issue of MSDs. I hope I'm referring to the correct issue that she typed in the WhatsApp chat. So Lulia Hamutenia is making comments. I'm just going to quickly read the comments. Also, many reports recommendations are too generic and not really solving ergonomic problems. Tools in existence are too vague, was the two comments put there by Lulia. And then Joyce de Villiers was saying, regarding the risk assessment in regards to the definition of competent person, if a person have the qualified experience, etc., to perform the risk assessment, this can then be used for internal training. So staff working from home can conduct the self-risk assessment more comprehensively. So I'm just reading those quick comments. It's not specific questions. Nirvana, Bilaram, SMA wants, okay, Nirvana wants your contact details, SMA. Please check in the Q&A box if you could add there as a typed response to Nirvana. And I'm going to ask my colleague Tabani just to keep the question answer box open for a little while longer beyond 12:30, so that people can just get their information and contacts that they were asking for. Okay, so I just want to find another question there. If in the meantime, Sma, your hand is up, do you want to just go for it?
Yes. So the comments that you made where they're saying that some of the tools are vague. I don't know which ones they're talking about, but there are a lot of very direct and validated tools that we are using for different kinds of ergonomics assessments, as well as ergonomic risk assessments. So if you feel that some of those tools are vague, then you probably, I would suggest that you consult an ergonomist so that they can guide you about what's the best tool for that particular risk that you are looking at. A lot of the times people will just go online and say ergonomic risk assessment and then take whatever comes there. But there's actually a lot of like really good tools that we are using that can help you identify very comprehensively some of the risks that are out there. And then I just wanted to comment on the person who was saying the definition of competent person. So yes, there are a lot of people who are experts in doing risk assessments in various other kinds of risks, but go back to the definition of competent person in the ergonomics regulations. It's very specific there about who is regarded as competent, and it speaks to qualifications, it speaks to experience, and it speaks to also things like, have you actually done work in that particular context? Are you familiar with the context? Are you familiar with the legal requirements? So please just be sure that yes, even if someone is like an expert in doing generic risk assessments, they need to have specific knowledge, experience, skills, specifically around ergonomics in order for them to tick all the boxes for competent person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to quickly ask Ndaba to come in before I come back to the colleagues about Sishle's question there. And I think there's also a question being answered on cognitive ergonomic risk assessment by Zandile. So Pome, over to you. Microphone's open. Please proceed.
I'm sorry, I'm not answering on that. I'd raised my hand to make a comment on a few comments on medical surveillance. Somebody was asking if there's a standard template for medical surveillance. So I just wanted to flag this, that when it comes to medical surveillance, there's never a standard template. And our regulations locally, our economic regulations stipulate that medical surveillance is what you get to or you decide based on the risk assessment. So it's depending on risk assessment findings, if there are controls in the workplace, and over and above that, it should be the OMP who needs to decide if there is a need for medical surveillance. So there's not a tool that you're going to find that will say everyone we're doing medical surveillance on. It should be based on the risk assessment. What have you identified? Because as indicated, there could be physical hazards, which you might have controls for. There could be cognitive hazards as well as organizational hazards. So medical surveillance actually should be better referred to as risk-based medical surveillance. Thank you.
Thank you. And the OMP that Mpumi refers to is
Sorry,
the occupational
medical practitioner.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Mpumi. Thank you for that. And so just back to our colleagues on ergonomics. Sma, I see your microphone is open. Do you want to proceed?
Sorry,
okay.
I
no problem.
time. Apologies.
Yeah. Okay. In the absence, obviously, of seeing each other physically in a room, your open microphone is my indication you want to say something. Okay. So on the question of cognitive ergonomic risk assessment, do you perhaps want to just quickly, briefly, Zandile, touch on that? I see you have answered that particular attendee's question. Open your microphone, please. And then there's a question. I see Smas answering it. Who is deemed competent to do the ergonomic risk assessment? Sandile, you first on the question of cognitive risk assessment. Please proceed. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Ashraf. I think just to build on what Sma is saying, there are tools out there that do look at cognitive aspects of work within the workplace. Some touch on aspects of cognitive, but they don't necessarily go into depth in discussing what the severity and also which element or which processes are highly impacted. So I think in terms of conducting such assessments, an ergonomist would be more critical to come into performing the in-depth assessments, such as task analyses, where we look at the manner in which a task is conducted, what information is required to perform that task, how is this information used, and what processes are then are required for the successful completion of that task. So there are various task analyses that can be done, from cognitive task analysis to hierarchical task analyses. So it would then just depend on the type of work that is being conducted. That will then determine which type of assessment is to be done. I hope that is clear.
Thank you very much for that. I wasn't sure, was it Smile may wanted to come in there earlier? Okay, let me not confuse that. Just quickly, Joyce de Villiers is asking, how do you get yourself onto the NIH's email database? If you're not already on our database, and we've got a significantly large Zoom COVID-19 occupational health and safety email database for our webinars and training that we present. We might go towards hybrid training as well, which is both online and face-to-face, etc., etc. If you're unsure if your email address is there and you've not received any invites from us, please email info, Jules, this is for you as well, info@nioh.ac.za. info@nih.ac.za. You have also put some of your email addresses in the chat box, which I just saw hundreds of email addresses popping up there. This is going to take a while just to harvest that, and before we can get you the invite for tomorrow's webinar. I will try and copy it and paste it also in the chat box so that you can see the link to register for tomorrow's, but we'll do that before we close, and we should be doing that in the next 3 minutes. We have, okay, so I'm going to then move over to the last 3 questions. Yeah, so that topic that the occupational medicine section is going to still deal with in training, has this been answered? by Dr. Ndaba, and she says it's the ergonomics risk assessments and MSDSs. We will be having training of that going forward. Sometimes the training is like this particular webinar, a COVID-19 free, people can join, etc. and so on, and the resources are made available. And sometimes some of our training are in fact for a small fee. We are a public health institute, and in the current sort of financial and other budgetary constraints, we need to look at the gaps in our resources required. Okay, last two questions that are open here. Is there, by Jacques Theod, is there a responsibility for the employer, for example, to provide a chair for employees working from home? I think that's been answered. Sorry, Jacques. I'm going to move on to Olivia. Olivia Powers, my question is regarding working in the conventional workplace with regard to visors. Those working in the public space with direct contact with customers, we advise that additional measures must be put in place, for example, screens and visors as barriers as per the regulations, with the requirement of changing. With the requirements changing, that is, masks not required to be worn in outdoor spaces, will visors be required to be worn. This is for the food, services, and restaurant industry. Olivia, I'm not going to ask our presenters to address that unless Dr. Ndaba is keen to respond to you. This will be addressed in tomorrow's webinar. And if we reach the maximum of 1,000 logins, I'm not talking about, we normally have more than 1,000 registrations, but if we reach more than 1,000 logins, where the limit is for the live webinar, we will be streaming it live on the YouTube channel, and I hope to click send on that text I've been slowly typing on the side here. So Olivia, please, since Smart, please proceed, your hand's up.
Thank you, Chair. I see, before I put my hand up, Marvin Klute hadn't actually asked the question, but that's what I wanted to highlight. With the discipline of ergonomics and human factors still being quite at developmental stages in South Africa, the reality is that unless you go to a university or some of the very few institutions that are available that have NQF or SAQA accredited courses, there are very, very few unit standards available and people that have been accredited against those. Even those unit standards that are available, they do not cover the full spectrum of what someone needs to know to be competent across the full discipline of ergonomics. So yes, on the one side, it's in the regulations, it needs to be NQF related, whatever qualifications you do, but also we need to be very, very sober to the fact that we do not yet have all of the relevant training requirements SAQA accredited. So unless you go to a university, you might struggle with that. That's the reality of it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so thanks for, yes, I am still unmuted. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask just a final check. Where is my question and answer box? I'm just moving things around here. It's too much. Whoops, 4 questions. Okay, let me just move Jacques' one. I think you've answered Marvin's one. Am I correct? And Dr. Ndaba is also answering there on Ndaba. Sorry, on Marvin's one. John Williams, can we get the link to the recording of today's presentation? That will come through afterwards, John. We must only first secure the attendance record of this webinar, and that's only generated by Zoom when it's done, in terms of sequence, and then we must harvest and clean up that list and then organize the email that tell you this is the presentations and these are where the videos are and this is where the audio recordings are. It will come within a day or two. We are also preparing for tomorrow's webinar, so we're a little bit under pressure. John, we will do that. So last question there, I think, was Olivia's, and I think we've covered this one about the conventional workplace and the screens and the, yes, we have, Olivia, so I'm moving that one out, which means our question answer box is clear. Please, our time has run out. Do not type any new questions. Oops, Litiwe. SM Smart. I did my training with Ergonomics Holdings within Compton. I'm going to ask Litiwe that you email Smart directly with regard to that question, and Dr. Ndaba is going to probably provide you with Smart's email address, etc. If you don't get Smart's email address immediately now, use that info@nih.ac.za email address and you say, please, can I get Smart's email address or something? And that's for all of you. If you need to get in touch with our presenters and you don't have the details here immediately, please put it there. I'm going to quickly now share, if I can get into the right Word document here. I'm going to share with you the link for tomorrow's webinar for you to be able to register. So I'm going to just have to copy two things. One is the title, and secondly is the one which is the link. So this is for tomorrow's webinar. I'm going to recommend that you copy this link, screenshot the link, and then register, right? All of our webinars, you must register. And after registering, you'll get an email with the confirmation of your registration, and you'll be given the link to join the webinar, which is a dedicated specific link for you, and nobody else can use that link to join the webinar, etc., because I don't think Zoom allows two people on the same confirmed registration link. I'm about to click send. One moment. I just need to do something there before I click it. Otherwise, it's going to be confusing. There we are. Okay, so it says COVID-19 vaccines in the workplace. The date is tomorrow from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And it gives you the clickable link there. Please, you can copy that clickable link there, or maybe click on it immediately, and then you will find you taken to the Zoom registration platform. I'm going to quickly share with you also what we are sending out. I think it's that one. So you'll see on your screen at the moment, if I can see it clearly, this is the program with a separate invite we've sent out for tomorrow's webinar on COVID-19 vaccines and the workplace. It is for all health and safety related people, COVID-19 compliance officers, etc., from 2 o'clock tomorrow. That link has just been shared with you on the chat box as well. And our speakers are from the topics of COVID-19 vaccine safety, COVID-19 workplace vaccination programs, and COVID-19 update. And that's Dr. Kalonji, Dr. Tembo, and Professor Shabir Mahdi, who's going to be dealing with those topics tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to say to everybody, firstly, maybe I should start with our IT team in the background there, and that's Tabani. Thank you very much, Tabani, for helping out and dealing with some of those curveballs today. And then to our team, the presenters, that's Tato on the teleworking, Sma on the working conditions before and during COVID-19, and my colleague Zandele on the cognitive aspects of working during COVID-19. Thank you very much for the work you've done to prepare and to make the time to join us in this webinar and share your wealth of information, expertise and experience. And then to Dr. Nompumelelo Ndaba for making the time out of her very, very busy schedule. It is the end of the financial year, and as head of the section there, you can just imagine what responsibilities our colleague Dr. Ndaba's got to deal with, and she's made the time to join us in this webinar to help with your questions, both in the question and answer box, as well as answering you live through the open microphone. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody. This has been a great webinar. We've had a bumper attendance, and ergonomics clearly is also one of the sexy topics in the occupational health and safety group of